Dear white people, shut up about IQ, okay? Just shut up about it. White supremacy has always been a house of historical justifications built on sand. As each one collapses, a new myth rises to take its place. During feudalism, white Europeans justified aristocracy by claiming that kings ruled by divine right. During colonialism, they justified their conquest with the white man's burden to civilize inferior races. During industrial capitalism, they justified global inequality by saying that free markets just naturally favored them. Now that the material reality of white dominance is falling apart, all they have left is IQ cope, a meaningless number they can scream about while everything else around them crumbles. They aren't the world's industrial power anymore. China is. They aren't the financial center of the world anymore. De-dollarization is happening. They aren't morally superior because history remembers the transatlantic slave trade, the Belgian Congo, and Hiroshima. And so they retreat to IQ statistics, as if a made-up test will change the course of history. White people love to pretend that IQ is some kind of objective, universal way of measuring intelligence. But in reality, it was designed from the start to uphold white supremacy. The first IQ tests were created by Francis Galton, a British eugenicist who wanted to prove the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race. IQ tests measure familiarity with Western cultural norms, not intelligence. A child from an African village or an Indian slum might score lower on the test not because of intelligence, but because the test is rigged against them. IQ scores are heavily influenced by education, diet, and the environment, all of which were deliberately sabotaged under centuries of white colonial rule. White people do not want to hear this, because if intelligence isn't genetic, their society is not built on merit, it's built on exploitation. If intelligence is environmental, then the only reason they got ahead is because of global resource theft. If intelligence is socially constructed, then they have no reason to be in power anymore. That's why they cling to IQ. It's not about science. It's about preserving the illusion that their dominance was earned rather than stolen. If white people were so much smarter, that explain why their civilization is collapsing under the weight of its own idiocy. They voted for Donald Trump twice. They still believe in trickle-down economics, despite 40 years of evidence that it doesn't work. They let Elon Musk burn $44 billion on Twitter X and still think he's a genius. They fall for every conspiracy theory under the sun. QAnon, Pizzagate, Jewish space lasers. They deny climate change when their cities flood and their forests burn. If IQ were a real measure of intelligence, then why is their entire society in a free fall? It's because IQ isn't a real measure of intelligence. It's a cope for people who are too delusional to admit that they're losing. While they scream about IQ, here's what's actually happening. China is producing entire high-speed railway networks in under a decade. India is producing more STEM graduates than the entire Western world combined. Africa is rising despite centuries of European debt and sabotage. Meanwhile, the West is imploding. American infrastructure is crumbling. European economies are drowning in debt. White birth rates are collapsing. So much for genetic superiority. And what do white people do? They scream about IQ. Because if they convince themselves that they are still the smartest, then they don't have to admit the obvious. They are losing. They are falling behind. And no amount of IQ cope will save them. White people love to scream about IQ until the numbers don't go their way. East Asian scores higher? Well, IQ isn't everything. Jewish people score higher? Maybe culture is the real factor. African IQ rising due to better education? Oh yeah, it definitely doesn't measure anything. So what's the truth? IQ is just another colonial lie. It's their last excuse, their final fantasy, their weakest shield against reality. Because when all the numbers are crunched, all the justifications are stripped away, and all of the excuses are exhausted, what's left? White people's real fear isn't IQ. It's irrelevance, and no test score can stop the inevitable. Cope.